Welcome to all our attendees, both here in the WebEx platform and also on YouTube. We have a wonderful panel discussion keyed up for today on the issue of leaving no one behind, ending youth global homelessness in the decade of action. I'm Lydia Stazen. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Global Homelessness. And I first want to say thank you so much to UN Habitat for hosting this event alongside us, and also to all of our wonderful panelists who've agreed to join us today, bringing really diverse perspectives from around the world, from Tasmania, from Ghana, from England, from Canada, and international perspectives. So we have NGO perspectives represented, we have government perspectives represented, we have lived experience perspectives represented here. So we are going to have a really fascinating and lively discussion. And so, as we go along for our attendees, if you can be putting your questions, your comments, your feedback into the chat option that's in the WebEx panel, we consider you to be equal participants in this conversation with us as well. So please chat along with us and we'll have time to entertain different questions and answers and discussions. So before we get into the meat of our program today, I'd like to share just a little bit about the Institute of Global Homelessness. We've been around for 6 years now, and we are a partnership between a university based in Chicago, Illinois, and a direct service organization based in London, England. So really looking to bridge that gap between academic research and best practice, along with work that's happening in the field, and bringing together global partners so that we can all do this work of ending homelessness better, faster, smarter. So Christina, if you're running the slides, if you can go forward to the SDG page. I'll just wait a moment for that to come up.
Just give me 1 second because I need to change programs.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. So one of the things that we have realized at the Institute of Global Homelessness is that out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were developed by member states of the United Nations, homelessness is not mentioned in any of those 17 or any of the 169 indicators of those SDGs. And when we think about the phrase, leave no one behind, we worry a little bit that because homelessness is not mentioned, is not explicitly named in those SDGs, that a really important and large group of people might be left behind. And so what we're working to do is just to bring our global partners together and to raise the issue of homelessness within the United Nations. And our partners at UN Habitat have been so helpful with that. Recently, just in February of this year, which, in some ways feels like 1,000 years ago, the Commission on Social Development put out a resolution on the issue of homelessness, which was, one of the first policy resolutions on the issue of homelessness in the United Nations for quite some time. So we were really pleased with that, level of attention on the issue by member states. And this resolution included a couple of important themes. One theme was the need for disaggregated data on homelessness. So how many people around the world are experiencing homelessness? What are their experiences like? How many youth, how many men and women, how many, people of non-binary gender identities are experiencing homelessness? Why are they experiencing homelessness? Just collecting more information and more data so that we can know what kinds of solutions are most helpful to people who are working through those experiences. So the need for data and the need for member states to work together on this issue, because we know that homelessness happens in every corner of the world, as today's panel kind of represents. And we are really filled with optimism that in this decade of action, coming to the close of this set of SDGs as we head towards 2030, more and more attention and interest on the issue of homelessness is going to increase and to come forward, so that together we can really make some strong steps forward in terms of ending homelessness. So really with that, it's my pleasure to hand over the rest of the panel facilitation to my colleague, Kaira Shetty. Kaira?
Hi there, thank you Lydia for such a warm welcome. And you'll actually see I'm wearing my SDG badge today. This is my active commitment to the SDGs and to solving homelessness through this framework. As Lydia mentioned, my name's Kaira and I'm a partnerships consultant at the Institute of Global Homelessness. Prior to joining IGH, I was actually an intern at the UN in the UN Office for Partnerships in New York. But most importantly, I'm what people older than me call a youth at 24. But jokes aside, I just want to say a big thank you to IGH and also UN Habitat for making space in today's discussion for myself as a POC young woman leading and moderating today's panel. And you'll see why this is so important, because throughout today's conversation, I really want to hone in on the term centering and why centering is so integral to conversations like today in policy making and in fact anything that pertains to inclusive change making. So that's a bit about me, and I just thought we could start the conversation off with just doing a quick round robin of all the participants, just saying who they are and briefly explaining where they're from and what they do. So if we could start with, I'll just go in order. Could we start with Chris, please? Oh, Chris, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. My name is Chris Williams and I work with the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, in the New York office.
And then Ayisha, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Please, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I am Ayisha Aminu. I'm from Ghana in West Africa. I'm representing Safe Child Advocacy, formerly known as Street Children Project, an NGO working with children on the streets managed by Catholic Sisters of Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul here in Kumasi. I was once homeless on the streets until I met Safe Child Advocacy, who gave me a home, an opportunity to enjoy childhood and access to basic education up till today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayisha. And can we go to Gregory next, please?
Hello, everybody. Gregory Lewis. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of True Colors United. We focus in on implementing innovative solutions to youth homelessness by focusing in on the unique experiences and needs of LGBTQ youth, youth of color, and other highly impacted young people, both here in the United States and around the globe.
Thanks, Gregory, and thanks for being part of the conversation. Next on my list, I can see Jax. So Jax, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jax Ewin. I'm a small business operator, a very proud non-binary queer, and I'm the youngest elected member of the city of Nipaluna, Hobart, and I've experienced homelessness on and off all my life. I think bringing lived experience to the table is really powerful and really meaningful and extremely important. Because we have firsthand experience of marginalisation and exclusion. And while those things are obviously unpleasant to have experienced, we're able to cast critical eyes on public policies and be part of making them better. So I'm really, really grateful to be here today. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Jax, and we're so happy to have you here as part of the conversation. And I should also mention to everyone else that Jax is an absolute superstar because they're up at the crack of dawn at 2:15 a.m. in Tasmania. So thank you, Jax. And next we'll go to Orpah, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Orpah Cundangan, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the community animator at Away Home Canada, which is a coalition, a national coalition reimagining solutions to youth homelessness through transformations in policy, planning, and practice. It's a bit of a mouthful, but there's a lot of good work there. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I immigrated from the Philippines to Canada, and today I'm calling in from what's now referred to as Toronto, the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, Wendat, Huron, and Haudenosaunee Indigenous peoples. And I just wanted to mention as well that with Away Home, our most recently published National Survey on Youth Homelessness, 40% of the youth respondents reported that their first experience of youth homelessness was before the age of 16. And so our work really focuses on uniting people across the government and across different sectors, service providers, and people with experience to shift towards preventing youth homelessness and sustaining exits from homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you everyone once again, all panelists, for joining today's conversation. It's Urban October, and we're in the launch of a decade of action for delivery of the SDGs. And so I couldn't think of a more poignant and important conversation to be having here right now. And so in my earlier remarks, kind of going back to actually what Jax mentioned in their introduction, this idea of centering and part and parcel of, the context of youth homelessness is empowering voices and privileging the lenses of those with lived experience of homelessness. This work is particularly core to everything that we do at IGH, and it's really important to us. And actually prior to this panel, Jax, who I'll be coming to in just a second, sent me a transcript of their speech, and Jax, I pulled out a quote from Jax's transcript because I think it sums up perfectly just what we're talking about here. And it was lived experience. It's more than just a buzzword. And I want to note that, when we convene events such as today, what I wanted to note is the experiences of people who've experienced homelessness. It's not for our consumption, but it's for us to, truly listen and build in the sentiments that we learn into the frameworks that we use to inform our solutions. So with that being said, Jax, we'll come to you first, actually, since I've used your quotes. And I just wanted to ask you, can you tell us through either your experiences of homelessness or otherwise, how you've gone on to do the brilliant work you're doing now in Tasmania?
Kaira, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt, and I appreciate your excellent facilitation of this session. Unfortunately, I will not be able to participate for the duration of this session, but my colleague Francesca De Ferrara will be participating. And I just wanted, if I could, and I apologize for this intervention, if I could just mention a few broad comments that would sort of set the scene for this, if that's okay.
Absolutely, by all means, go for it.
All right, Kaira, thank you for that, and thanks everybody for participating in this webinar. And I really like the design of it, and I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be with you throughout it. But this is exactly the kind of engagement that we're looking for within the United Nations, something that is not confined to bureaucrats and technicians, but really is speaking directly with people who are either working on homelessness issues or themselves have experienced homelessness, and preferably those that have worked on homelessness who themselves have experienced and are bringing their experiences to bear, as was mentioned by Jax on the lived experience. We really appreciate the Institute of Global Homelessness and their collaboration with us. We had an event earlier in Urban October with Luis, and Lydia and I have been in touch over the years and are grateful that this collaboration is maturing. I'm also happy to see organizations of True Colors, the Hobart City, Tasmania, Street Children Project, and Away Home all these different innovations and organizations, even if they're small or even if they're large, they're making an important contribution to this issue. I just wanted to give a quick background on UN Habitat's work in this space, and also more broadly the UN. The Interagency Network on Youth for Development was established about 10 years ago, and UN Habitat was one of the co-leads of that network, which brought different parts of the UN system together to really open up spaces for youth, but be smarter about the kind of programming that was happening across the UN system to make it much more involving with the youth. Not necessarily tokenism or symbolic, but really drawing on youth to be protagonists in the initiatives. This is something that Habitat took close to heart. This thinking has evolved. The Interagency Network of Youth for Development has been replaced with when the Secretary General came in and really prioritized youth issues and appointed a youth envoy to represent youth issues at the highest levels. That youth envoy has participated in sessions of the General Assembly and the Security Council of the United Nations, which is unprecedented to have that level of influence and access. And I think the Secretary General, it demonstrates his commitment to youth. The Youth, Peace and Security Resolution that was adopted by the Security Council is an important instrument and should, I think, be considered when looking at the broader definition of this, because it includes displaced persons and people that have been affected both by refugees that have been affected across borders, but within their own countries have been internally displaced. Many of them are youth, and bringing in the youth component in peace and security is crucial. It was in that vein that UN Habitat about 5 years ago established an initiative in hotspots in South Sudan, in Somalia, Eastern Ethiopia, places where northern Kenya, where this issue of youth displacement was a big deal. And we organized youth into youth hubs, which were focused primarily on entrepreneurship and livelihoods, and looking at ways that young people could be much more active in realizing their productive capacity, whether they had school or no school, to engage in entrepreneurial activities. We felt that this was an important priority because of what we were hearing when we surveyed youth and engaged them in this program design. Of course, COVID came, and we've all been struggling with COVID, and I just wanted to end by saying a few things that I would like to keep in mind with COVID, because it is the new operating environment. I think most of the UN system, international organizations, large non-governmental organizations, even small community-based organizations and youth initiatives are all grappling with how to transition towards COVID. And what we did with this youth hubs for youth, peace and security is we realized that a major need was sanitation and hygiene. So we repurposed these youth hubs. They still focus on entrepreneurship, but we focused on how to create opportunities for people to have access to sanitation and hygiene in informal settlements and slums, because they were disproportionately affected by COVID, and youth were in the front lines of this activity. So just as an example of how do we repurpose existing initiatives to address the conditions that COVID presents and be adaptive and flexible. In addition, I just wanted to highlight, and this came up in the session that we had last week with Luis from Institute of Global Homelessness, and that is a big problem with evictions. This is going to affect global north, global south, east, west, north, south, as the recession continues and deepens, as so many people are not able to work as they did before. In stream, we're going to have a huge eviction crisis. The ability for various local, national, local, and state governments to support households that have been unable to pay rent has a certain shelf life. At a certain moment, that's going to stop, and landlords will be within their regulations, within the rules of their local authorities to evict people that are not paying. So this, I think, this is going to be a huge crisis, and I think youth are going to be disproportionately affected, and yet could be part of the answer. And getting more and more youth involved with that will be important moving forward. And I just encourage everybody on this call to be continuing to be adaptive and flexible in the new operating environment. And of course, we look forward to learning of the outcomes of this and are happy to follow up. I would like to thank a number of people on this call. I'm not going to list everybody's name, but I know a lot of groundwork went into this with both UN Habitat. My colleague Lucas is an intern and has been taking a very important role in setting all this up. And my other colleagues, and of course, I'm sure, Kaira, there's a lot of people behind the scenes in Institute of Global Homelessness that are also doing this. So I want to thank everybody for their putting this initiative together. Over to you, Kaira. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. I think what you said about the COVID-19 pandemic and the context we're finding ourselves in is really important. I think I was just reading a news article the other day that Gen Zs and millennials are going to end up in as what they call the forgotten generation, and that's to do with plummeting rates of unemployment, and which can inevitably lead to homelessness. So actually, I think what I might do is I might segue back to Jax. Sorry, Jax, I'm going to come back to you here because I think you work really on the ground in Hobart City in Tasmania. And I just wanted to get your perspective on what you think the reasons are for youth homelessness in Tasmania.
Thank you. So I guess, as always, and with homelessness, the reasons for people being homelessness are always really complex. We're really complex creatures, and I think there are a lot of different moving parts that have to align in our lives in order for things to work out and be okay. And I guess that's something that we are not usually very conscious of because that makes you feel very much out of control. And I suppose in, late capitalism and this age of pandemics and stuff has really only just proven that point, is that we are basically completely out of control of most things in our lives. But I would say specifically for homelessness, and in my personal experience and the people who I know, like it's a combination of a lot of different factors. So domestic and family violence was certainly a part of the reasons why I was homeless on and off throughout my life. And, mental health, not having enough income to actually pay rent. We have a massive housing crisis here in Tasmania at the moment where just affordability it's through the roof. Like compared to the wages that people are bringing home, like we're spending 50, 60, 70, 80% of our incomes on rent. And you just think about the implications for that, meaning, people have to forego things like food and medicine to just put a roof over their own head. And, I think we've set this system up to fail. We've set this system up to incentivize hoarding of wealth in the hands of a few wealthy individuals at the direct expense of the whole rest of the community. And that sucks. And I think, we certainly need to have a rights-based approach to housing, where it's seen as an inalienable right, because that's, without that, you can't have anything else. You can't participate in community. You can't think about work. You can't think about family commitments if you don't have a roof over your own head. It's just such a basic need. And without that framework, without a dignity-based, rights-based framework, informing all the rest of our policies, it's all just set up to fail, really.
Thanks, Jax. And I completely agree with you. I think without addressing the homelessness crisis, the youth homelessness crisis that's happening everywhere in urban cities and non-urban areas, we do run the risk of not achieving the 2030 agenda, and we will inevitably be leaving people behind. And so I just want to ask you, we've got Chris still on the call here, what do you think, what would you like to see the UN doing to move the needle on this issue?
Me personally, I think in this day and age it's unethical and impractical and actually really patronising to design policies without people with lived experience at the core of the discussions. I think politicians and bureaucrats who design public policies may have all the best intentions, but more often than not, their salaries exclude them from truly understanding the hardships that marginalised people live and breathe every day. So I firmly believe that diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice heard. So my challenge to the UN and to anybody in decision-making positions is to move over and let people with lived experience take the mic, because we know what we need and you can't make these decisions about us without us.
Thanks, Jax. And I think with this decade of action for delivery on the SDGs, I'm seeing personally, having worked at the UN, youth being included more into the conversation. And I hope to see more of it, because we are the future change makers of tomorrow. We're the future leaders of tomorrow. And ultimately, in a decade's time, decades time, we're the ones who are living with the consequences of social impact. So thank you so much, Jax. And I think at this point, it'll be really interesting to move kind of from Tasmania over to Ghana, where we have Ayisha on the call. Ayisha, can you hear us? I think your camera's off.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. So I've got my first question for you, which I know you've prepared for. And my question is, a bit of background noise there. Having experienced youth homelessness in Ghana, Ayisha, and being just 16 yourself, why is it that you think people your age and those even younger are finding themselves in this position in your country?
Thank you. My experience when I was on the streets is that I have a PowerPoint to show you about what it looks like. And I would like to share my screen.
Sure. Naomi, can we sort that out, or Christina? Thank you.
So you should be able to share now.
Okay. Your slide. What's your slide? Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Youth homelessness in Ghana. Okay. Please, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, but can you perhaps click on presentation mode? It's on the very top on that orange bar, right next to that arrow turning around to the left. Is this one with the screen and the play button? It's on the very top, the orange bar. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Please, is it okay? Hello?
It's not starting. It's not changing for us, the presentation. Oh, I think it
Okay, we can
now.
see it now. Yeah.
Thank you. When I was on the streets, I was not different from these people. You are seeing them sleeping beside a building. And some of them are even 8 years, 11 years, 12 years, 10 years. And the basins they used to carry the loads are even bigger than them, as you can see the basins. And see them sleeping beside the building. And over 60,000 children live on the streets of Ghana between the major cities of Accra and Kumasi. Some of these young girls ranges between 0 to 18 years, with girls being the majority. They engage in menial jobs, such as selling water, head porters, and selling yogurt and others. These are some of the young children on the streets with their mother. Young children living on the streets with their mother, and they are sleeping beside an abandoned railways. As many as 300 boys live under this bridge in Asafo in Kumasi. Some of these boys sleep at an abandoned railways under overhead bridges. As you can see, these are some of the young girls living on the streets, and field workers of Safe Child Advocacy interacting with them. And these are some of the young girls. When I was on the streets, I was the same. I was not different from these people, these young girls, you are seeing them. I was not different from these young girls you are seeing them. And when I was there, sometimes if I carry the load, I'll not get money. And if I want to rest, I don't have any place to rest unless I sit beside a gutter, so that I'll have my peace, so that the people beside there, they will not disturb me. And these are some of the young girls. This girl can be maybe 12, 13, 14, and as you can see, this young girl who has delivered on the streets and struggled to take care of herself and the baby. And it is easy to get pregnant on the streets because they sleep on open places and they can be raped anyhow. Homeless youth in Ghana are exposed to abuses, exploitation, and violence. We have no right or any form of dignity. We are treated with scorn and disrespect. We can even be killed. We easily fall victims to human trafficking. We lack access to the basic needs of education, healthcare, and safety. We do not enjoy our child rights. This is what homelessness looks like in my. And as you can see, these young people sitting in this PowerPoint during the pandemic, Safe Child Advocacy shared food, drinks, and face masks for them. And this is our logo, Safe Child Advocacy. Several reasons account for young people being homeless, some of which are poverty. Extreme poverty in the family drives children to the streets to source for livelihood. Parental irresponsibility. Some parents bear as many children without considering their resources to cater for them. Abusive family situations. When children can no longer bear abuses in the family, they take to the streets for freedom. Breaking marriages. Once a couple break up and each remarry, the child in the old marriage is no one's issue. And it is true, because when my parents has divorced, and that makes me to come to the streets. They sent me to my aunt, and the way she was treating me, I was not happy with that, because I wanted to go to school when I was with her, and she didn't allow me to go to school. Every day she would be beating me and sending me to the farm to look for firewood and pepper to come to the house to prepare food for her children that went to school. And I don't like it. That makes me to come to the streets. Unhealthy cultural practices, where children are given out to be raised by their aunties. Most aunties maltreat and exploit their children and force them on the streets. When I was with my auntie, it's the same thing she was doing to me. She me, maltreating me, Peer influence. Of course, young persons are not always blameless. They can sometimes be responsible for being on the streets. Need for excessive freedom. Sometimes young people want to be free from responsibilities, free to do what they like. These are some of the reasons young persons in Ghana find themselves in conditions of homelessness. What needs to be done? 1. Government, the UN and the government of my country, Ghana, to enforce respect for the rights of the child in reality and not just on papers, and to truly address situations that create inequality, extreme poverty. 2. Child protection and safeguarding should be demanded from duty bearers, including parents, guardians, teachers, carers, and etc. 3. Child welfare or well-being should be a priority to all. A call for action that no child spends its childhood on the streets should be a priority to politicians, government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayisha, and thank you for the really informative presentation you gave us just now. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your experiences with us. We are really, really grateful to have you here on the panel at 16 years old. And we're so thankful that you've opened up your life to us to illustrate what youth homelessness really looks like in Ghana. And I just wanted to touch on something you said at the end, because when you listed the different reasons for youth homelessness in Ghana, it became really clear to me to link it back to the SDG framework we spoke about earlier, is there really are so many reasons, and each of those reasons can intersect with the SDGs as well, which is why it's so important that we don't forget homelessness in this framework. So from no poverty to zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, all of those SDGs in some way or another intersected with the points you mentioned. So thank you for re-highlighting that. And I just wanted to ask you, on our call yesterday, you mentioned to me that you're speaking on behalf of 60,000 other children who found themselves, in a position like yourself. And I just wanted to ask you once again what you would like to see the UN doing moving forward.
That no child spends its childhood on the streets. It should be a priority to all politicians, governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayisha. And I think I want to use this moment now to note that when we go back to what Jax has earlier mentioned and now what Ayisha's mentioned, there are, of course, a lot of common threads and a lot of common reasons for why young people are experiencing homelessness. But I think it's also important to note that homelessness, let alone youth homelessness, is it's an intersectional issue. People who have experienced homelessness are not one homogenous group. And I think it's really important that when we're designing solutions and when we're designing policy, that we remember that there are people with contextually bound needs, cultural needs that need to be addressed. And I think at this point, this is where I'd like to bring in Gregory and Orpah and really speak to them about their work, because I know it's specifically targeted to youth homelessness, and then within that to other communities experiencing youth homelessness in itself. So if I could go to Orpah first, please. would you mind just explaining a little bit about what Away Home in Canada is doing for youth homelessness?
Good thing, Kaira. Thank you. So at Away Home, like I mentioned earlier, sorry, we work with all orders of government, communities, service providers, and philanthropy to prevent and end youth homelessness through transformations in policy, planning, and practice. So we're trying to cover multiple sectors and multiple systems through a collective impact framework that we use to approach this work. And through those collaborations, we're able to really elevate youth voice as well. So that's an integral part of guiding the work that we do and guiding the transformations that we're trying to support. In my role in particular, I support service providers and leaders at youth serving agencies across Canada to connect together within communities of practice. So I'll speak to that aspect of our work as it's become more and more relevant as COVID has really deeply impacted how, frontline service providers are able to engage with the young people that they normally serve and have had to adapt and change in so many ways to policies that are rapidly changing with second waves coming in and everything. So we have a few community of practice spaces, but the idea of these spaces are to gather frontline staff, leadership, and sometimes representatives from other systems and sectors to come together to work through challenges, to share about the most pressing emerging needs in their communities, and to celebrate the successes and innovations that they're seeing in preventing and ending youth homelessness. And in these spaces, they're able to elevate the needs of the youth that they're serving and to elevate that youth voice. So most recently, because of the COVID pandemic, we were hearing from service providers that they had a need to come together to learn about what others were doing to manage and respond to the pandemic. So within that community of practice space, we've discussed things like how are frontline service providers able to engage with young people who are the most marginalized and maybe don't have as easy access to technology, or new young people who are accessing services because their circumstances have changed. So those are the types of things that we discuss on that call, and it happens weekly. And we didn't know how long that community practice would last because we sort of brought it up as we saw the need, and this amazing group of people has continued to meet. In fact, last week we had an impactful discussion about how organizations are quickly adapting and managing change based on what they learned from managing the pandemic during its first wave as we're approaching our second wave. So those spaces are just really, incredible learning exchanges between people and support between people across sectors and systems to get aligned on preventing and ending homelessness. So it's a bit about the practice work specifically.
No, thank you, Orpah. That's really helpful. And that really just ties in with this whole underlying thread throughout this whole conversation, which is in fact centering and putting people who know what youth homelessness is, who are young and who are experiencing the impacts of whatever's going on around us at the center of the conversation. I keep saying the word centering, but I think it is really very important to this conversation and empowering those people and privileging their lenses. And so I was doing a little bit of my browsing before this panel, and I know Away Home does a lot of work in terms of working with BIOPC communities and the LGBTQ+ community, of whom statistics state are particularly overrepresented with homelessness. And I was just wondering, could you explain a bit more of the work you're doing in that respect? For sure.
And I mentioned the National Youth Homelessness Survey earlier. We also have we recently released the What Would It Take report, which asked 114 youth participants, what would it take to prevent youth homelessness? And between those reports, we saw that 29.5% of young people identified as LGBTQ2S, 30.6% identified as Indigenous, and 28.2% identified as members of racialized communities. And so we know from research and from talking to young people with lived experience that BIPOC and LGBTQ plus youth are overrepresented in, as you mentioned, Kaira, in homelessness in Canada. And so I'll speak to this a little bit through again, referring back to the collaborative work that we do. Because we use a collective impact framework, our goal is to co-create solutions with community partners, including young people with lived experience of homelessness. And so there are many different ways, not just through the communities of practice, that we elevate youth voice. In hosting the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness, which is a network of service providers across Canada, who all are doing incredible youth engagement work at their organizations, and along with co-leading the Making the Shift social innovation and demonstration labs. I'm sorry all of these titles are so long, but our work, I wanted to kind of reiterate that our work is infused with perspectives from frontline staff who are able to elevate youth voice and who are able to connect us directly with young people. Because in my role, I don't work directly with young people, but we know, as you said, the importance of centering those voices, right? So we make sure that through our collaborations, we're able to do that. And it's integral to ensuring that we're working towards the necessary and positive outcomes that those most marginalized young people need. And so I mentioned some of the reports that we released earlier, but from those stats, we can see that BIPOC youth and LGBTQIA plus youth and 2S youth need to be better supported, as they're overrepresented across all of these different systems in Canada. So we know that they need to be better supported. And because we work across so many different systems and sectors, we're able to share resources and learnings to implement solutions that will be impactful for those youth, for those BIPOC and 2S LGBTQIA plus young people. And a great example of kind of the emerging need for a resource that multiple of our community partners collaborated on is the 2S LGBTQIA plus toolkit, which we first released. And I believe there was a lot of involvement from Gregory and Jema at True Colors United on this effort as well, and multiple community partners that we have. But that toolkit was launched a few years ago, but as we've learned more about gaps that we were missing with the initial launch, and including people with lived experience who have given us additional input on the toolkit, we actually wound up relaunching it last year. And so it's a document that continues to evolve as we learn more about how to better serve young people. And we're hoping that with anything we put out, it's going to be the same. And so those are just some of the ways that I think I can put best to answer your question, Kaira. Thank you.
Thank you, Orpah. And I could see Gregory doing lots of nodding while you were speaking. And for me, it was really great to learn that actually True Colors United and Away Home Canada are already in collaboration and working together. They say at the UN, it's SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, is the way to unlock all the other SDGs. And so I want to use this moment to bring in Gregory now, and if he wants to elaborate on any of the points Orpah brought up.
Well, first of all, I was nodding my head throughout the entire presentation today, all the way from the beginning with what Jax had to say, all the way through. So much of what has been shared is essential to understanding and ending youth homelessness around the globe. And I appreciate, the collaboration that we have with Away Home Canada has been a really great example of how working together can really produce the kind of work that needs to happen across the globe. And through our relationship with Away Home Canada, we've also been working with many partners in Europe and Central America, Asia, Africa, and Latin America to start to really understand the scope, particularly around LGBTIQ plus youth homelessness around the globe. And certainly from like a Northern American, European context, from a North American context, we have some hard data. Orpah shared some from Canada. In the United States, we have 4.2 million young people a year who experience some form of homelessness. LGBTQ plus youth make up 40% of that population and are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTQ plus youth. Black young people are 86% more likely to experience homelessness in America, and Latinx youth are 33% more likely to experience homelessness in America. And that, we believe, is an underrepresented number because in America, Latinx people are less likely to engage in surveys and data collection out of fear of discrimination, given what we have going on in America right now. But I wanted to give a little bit of a context as to, while we have some more intangible data in North America, we do have some beginning data from around the globe that also continues to share that LGBTIQ plus youth are overrepresented in the youth homelessness population. So from the Fundamental Rights Agency in Europe, 1 in 5 members of the LGBTIQ plus community experience homelessness. And when you focus in on transgender people, that's 1 in 3. And up to 40% of intersex people in Europe experience homelessness. In Australia, report studies that we found are the LGB people are 2 times more likely to experience homelessness. In West Africa, some initial research we found was that homelessness is reported as a serious issue for LGBTQ plus youth in the region, as well as in Nepal, especially for transgender young women. So, so this is a universal problem. And what's also a universal problem is we don't have enough data and research to really understand the scope of LGBTIQ plus youth homelessness. And that is where we need to be investing so much of our time, energy, and resources, because if we do not understand the problem, we can't actually begin to address and end the problem. And so at True Colors United, we really operate under a couple of theories of change. The first is, and has been talked a great deal about already, is really centering the experiences of those most impacted by homelessness. And centering is an important word to really talk about, because this isn't about just saying, oh yeah, we're focusing on that population, or we're listening to young people. That is passive. It has to be actually integral and a part of the essence of what we're doing. And when we're talking about youth voice, it's really youth leadership. It's about young people with lived experience at the table with power to make the decisions that have to be made to end this problem. You know, until that happens, we're not going to end youth homelessness around the globe. And until we make sure that those young people represent the population actually experiencing homelessness, wherever that is, whether that's LGBTIQ plus, whether that's based on ethnicity or race, whether that's based on gender, whatever populations are most impacted need to be the ones that are at the table and who have the power to drive the actual change. And it is possible. In America, 5 years ago, the idea of youth leadership in communities and at a national level was not even at the forefront. Now, over the last 3 years in particular, True Colors United has led the effort to establish 50 youth action boards in communities across the country in their efforts to actually develop their community-based plans to end youth homelessness. Those plans don't get developed, they don't get approved, they don't happen without young people with lived experience in those youth action boards being a part of the process and approving and moving those plans forward. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of resources, but it's possible, it can happen, and this is just the beginning.
Thank you, Gregory. And I guess we're all kind of echoing or singing from the same songbook here in terms of this idea of centering. And I actually wanted to come back to Jax, if that's okay, because you've experienced homelessness, but you're also now working to solve it. And I was just wondering, what are some of the successes or challenges in being a young queer elected official in Hobart City?
Thank you. Being a young queer elected official, female, presenting, all of that stuff is basically like walking around with a big "kick me" sign on. But it's extremely worthwhile and very rewarding. I guess like some of the successes, I mean, last year I put up a motion which was really successful in terms of advocacy in declaring a housing and homelessness crisis for the city. And from that, we established a reference group for, actually it was more like a common ground sort of network for all relevant stakeholders, levels of government, NGOs, community representatives, just to communicate more effectively. And through the advocacy of that group, we managed to get Tasmania's federal public housing debt scrapped, which is something that the government said would never happen, as well as securing additional funding for emergency housing and homelessness services through winter. So the debt removal means we were finally able to fund more social and public housing, which is awesome. We need so much more, but it's a start. So we also established a lived experience reference group, which I'm a co-chair of. And through that, we were able to establish the city's first drop-in overnight centre for people experiencing homelessness, which is, again, obviously much needed for our city because we have a steadily growing homeless population. And I think, you know, while these successes in global terms are pretty small, they're very tangible and they're making a real difference in people's lives. And this wouldn't have happened without, you know, having voices like mine at the table, you know, demanding that we as leaders do better.
Thank you, Jax. And I just think it's so amazing what you've managed to achieve and what you're continuing to achieve. And I just want to say thank you again for joining this panel and also for staying up to this ungodly time. Gregory, I actually wanted to come back to you because I'm really interested by your lens on data, because at IGH we always say, you know, if you can't see it, you really can't solve it. And I'm conscious that we've got lots of people from different corners of the world, but we've not actually got anyone on this call representing Central America. And so I wondered, do you have any data or reference points that could speak to homelessness in that part of the world?
So data is essential. Without it, we can't drive the change forward, and we can speak to the power of data so far in driving our work over the last decade. But in Central America, that is one of the obstacles, is collecting that data. And one of the things that the primary work we're doing right now in Central America is partnering with Casa Alonza, which is Covenant House International's sites in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, to do assessments within each of those agencies to understand how they are working with LGBTIQ plus youth, what their challenges are, what their successes are, and what their needs are to be able to do better. And really then providing them the kind of training and support to put the recommendations that come out of that assessment into place. And part of that is better data collection. And so one of the things we're about to release on Monday, actually, our first European report that we've done with Fianza, with their membership, to understand the challenges that they're facing in addressing LGBTIQ plus youth homelessness. And it mirrors a survey that we did in 2011 and 2015 here in America that's actually driven our work over the last decade. But what it has found is that data collection and lack of knowledge of how to work with LGBTIQ plus youth are their greatest challenges in actually serving LGBTIQ plus youth. And so as a result of having that data and knowing that that's a common barrier across their membership, Fianza now brought all their partners together, and they just released their first ever definition of youth homelessness in Europe, even just from the basis of how they were defining the age groups of young people experiencing homelessness were wildly different. So now they have an agreed upon definition that gives them a starting point from which to work forward, not only to address LGBTIQ plus youth experiencing homelessness, but all young people experiencing homelessness. So it's really about helping programs, whether it's Central America, Europe, or around the globe, to understand the importance of data collection, and then particularly the needs of how do you actually ask questions around sexual orientation and gender identity amongst young people. It's extraordinarily private information, and in some places, if you share that, it can be extraordinarily dangerous for a young person to share that information. So we have to understand and the barriers that communities, providers, and people working with young people are facing, and how do we help them understand how to ask and get this information, and then what to do once you have it, actually to create that safe, welcoming, inclusive environment, so that young person doesn't run from the help they need, but actually engages in the help they need.
Thank you, Gregory. And to your point about the global definition of youth homelessness, I find that a really interesting one, because I think there's plenty of conversations to be had around an inclusive definition, and what an inclusive definition looks like in one country might not necessarily translate into another country or another culture. And I can imagine that's quite a hard task, and that only comes with doing lots of talking, lots of centering, lots of discussion, and really honing in on the data that we're getting. And going back to this age-old point of centering, I want to go back to Ayisha, because I want to find out from Ayisha exactly how are young people's voices being empowered in Ghana.
Thank you.
Yes, got you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ayisha.
In different. Thank you. In Ghana, there are different NGOs that's working with the young people on the streets, empowering them.
Thanks, Ayisha.
Educating them like me here. One of the organization that's called Safe Child Advocacy, that's helping me, taking care of me in the house, and I'm there with some young people that their ages are very low, they are very small, and we have 3 years, 2 years, and 8 years children. And they sponsored 600 children in school, and I am part of that children that they are sponsored. That is how they are empowering young people, some of the young people in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayisha. And I'm so glad to hear that you're back in school, learning as every young person should, because we know that with education, unlocks potential and solutions, and us younger generation are the people that are going to be the future leaders of tomorrow. So I'm really happy to see that. Orpah, I have a...
And also, they are supporting some young people in skill training. Thank you.
No, and you're completely right, because I think it's very important that if you're going to be empowering young people, you need to empower them with sustainable solutions to be able to obtain a job and live self-sufficiently eventually. So I'm really glad to hear of all the good work that's happening in empowering the young people in Ghana. Orpah, I'm just going to flit over to you. And actually, at this point, I want to say we've got 20 minutes left of the call, our question and answer box is looking very empty. So if there's anyone in the audience who has some questions for us, please do send them in. Otherwise, we'll continue to talk about centering till the end of the call. But please do send in your questions. But Orpah, I had a question for you. You mentioned in your opening comments that the Indigenous groups whose land you're on, and I was just wondering what you could share with us about the specific needs of Indigenous youth in Canada who are homeless.
Sure thing, Kaira. Well, that's a very big question, but I can say that we're at Away Home working on a lot of different programs and initiatives where maybe case models are being changed to better support Indigenous youth. We run through the Making the Shift demonstration labs. We have 2 demonstration projects that are, or one demonstration project that is focused on housing first for youth for Indigenous youth specifically. And through that program, they're making sure that housing first for youth is applied differently to support Indigenous youth and make sure that Indigenous youth are being connected to, given the opportunity to connect to their culture. They're aiming to hire journey coaches and navigators who identify as Indigenous to help support the young people that they're working with. And in all of the programs that are involved with the demonstration lab, there are Indigenous youth represented within those programs. And so we continue to have conversations about how our programs are meeting the needs of those youth, or maybe not. The prevention sites that are part of that demonstration lab work on family and natural supports programming. So supporting young people to, reconnect with family, or to connect with adults who are supportive in their communities, who they can, lean on once they exit homelessness. And we're talking a lot right now about how just working with family and leaning on community is such a big part of Indigenous culture already. And so what does it look like to work with an Indigenous young person to reconnect with their family or their aunties or their grandmas? And how does that change the way that we implement that family and natural supports framework across Canada? So there are a few different ways that we're just looking at how, if there are adaptations that need to be made, but most importantly, how we can infuse all of the programs that we support, or support those programs to infuse their programming with an Indigenous lens. And I think that calls back to your point about centering, Kaira, and making sure that these, at organizations and within programs, Indigenous youth are heard and listened to, and like Gregory and Jax were saying, have a seat at the table and are able to inform how these programs are run and how their needs can be met most effectively.
Thanks, Orpah. And it's really interesting you say that, because I think I'm looking at the question and answer box and we're getting some questions in now. And Twiggy's mentioned, she asked, how do you go beyond centering people with lived experience to hiring them and even having them at leadership and board levels? So I guess the question is, how do you move it along from simply having someone with a lived experience at the table, but then actually giving them real power and real autonomy within a company or in an organization? Is there anyone who wants to take the lead on that question?
I will, because Twiggy works with me at
Nice. Hi, Twiggy.
Twiggy works. Twiggy is our chief program officer, and started out as a program officer 6 years ago at True Colors United. And is an example of what needs to happen at organizations across the globe, in that Twiggy has lived experience themselves, as does almost more than a third of almost a half, I believe now, of our staff are people with lived experience of homelessness at all levels of the organization. And so, and it has transformed the work that we do as an organization. And to be frank, Twiggy has created what is now our youth action work and our technical assistance work that, as I described earlier, that is happening in 50 communities across America and will be happening in another almost 50 communities over the next couple of years, of really making sure that young people with lived experience are in positions of power and are driving the change both at the local level and at the national level. And so it is vitally important that that you not just speak it, but you have to turn your belief and your values into action. And it's not hard. And anybody who says that it is just, you know, skirting the decision to actually do it. And I can guarantee anybody who does put their values, if those are truly your values, into action, you'll never regret it, because you will see the transformation that happens every single day.
Thank you, Gregory. And I'm just conscious of time, and I'm seeing so many questions that I want to get through here. Nadia asks, how can I, as an average person, do my part to combat youth homelessness? I think, I mean, everyone's welcome to jump in at this point, but I think as an average person, average seems a bit harsh, but I think it's all about knowing your privilege and knowing your power and what you can do in a situation, and no action is too small. That could be from just treating a person that you pass on the street with a bit of dignity and smiling and engaging in conversation, to donating to a food bank, to lobbying your local politicians and MPs, writing in, expressing your disdain for the youth homelessness crisis, attending events like this, asking important questions. I think there's no action too small, and it's when we collaborate together and keep staying active, the most important thing is staying active, that we can really move the needle. Does anyone else want to add their perspective?
I just wanted to add one more thing, because I don't think I actually answered the question of how you can actually do that. How can you actually answer Twiggy's question? And I think, you know, one of the key things that has to happen as people, as, you know, myself, even as a, you know, 45-year-old gay white man, I have to, you know, challenge myself on adultism and the intrinsic way that I was raised and taught how to do my job, to think from an adultist perspective and not value young people and value lived experience. And that requires you to kind of challenge yourself in ways that we all have to challenge ourselves on when we have biases across whatever wherever our biases might sit. And so I think there's a tool that you can use on our website. It's our Youth Collaboration Toolkit that was actually created by the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, in which it can really help you start to look at, understand adultism, break that down, and so that you can actually put this into action and be able to put what you believe are your values actually into action.
Thank you. And I think at this point, I actually want to bring Francesca, she's still on the call, into the conversation, because I know she's keen to share us a bit about her UN Habitat perspective to round things up, and also just share a trailer of some of the work UN Habitat have been doing in this field.
Well, actually, it's very timing, because exactly what the normal can do is, for instance, join our campaign. We are, this month is Urban October, as you very well know, and we are running a a campaign that is called Housing for All campaign. So we would like to call, not only the organization and the member states that we are working with usually, but to really advocate and engage with everybody. And is the reason why we partner with a fantastic director that gave us some of his image when he actually did a documentary to know what is home, what is the meaning of home for people, because also to understand what is home, it also helps you to understand the definition of homeless. So for now, at the time of social media, we would like to ask all our audience, all our followers, all the people that are interested in the topic, to follow us, to engage in the campaign, to share with their network, so that we are sure to reach as many people as possible. And if you don't mind, I would like to run a very short trailer. So then in the chat, Tina already uploaded the link for the campaign, and everybody can join the campaign with us. Thank you.
Please let me know if you can hear it.
هذا عندي باب جبته من هناك وياي من جيش صلاح الدين، وبحث في هذا المخيم هو أن نجيت أنا وعائلتي من الموت في هذا المنطقة.
البيت مكان الذي أعيش فيه. ساعدوني حتى ساعدوني إلى أن أصل إلى مجتمع. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And I think what we kind of gained from that trailer is that home means so many different things to so many different people. And actually going back to that data point that we talked about earlier, it's really important that when we understand home is a different meaning for lots of different people, and we're inclusive in our definitions, because it's when we have inclusive definitions that we can get the right data. And when we have the right data, then we can make the right solutions. I'm conscious that we've got 8 more minutes left. So I'm just going to pop back onto the question tab of the feed, and I'm seeing a few more questions here. We've got a question for Ayisha here. Neve says, thanks for talking about education in Ghana. What are you studying, and is the type of training being offered relevant to young people's voices in your community? Ayisha, can you hear us?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Please repeat it again.
So the question from Neve was, what are you studying? And
Kaira,
is the yes?
please repeat what you said.
Okay, I'll be a little bit clearer. What are you studying in Ghana? And what type of training is being offered to young people in your community?
Thank you. I'm a student, and the training, some of the organizations are teaching young people are catering, hairdressing, dressmaking, and some of the boys, they send them to kente weaving. I'm a student in secondary school, and others are in universities, and others are in primary schools and JHS. And as I was talking about the working, some of the boys, they send them in carpentry training and welding training and different types of works. And they also send them to training that they can build a house. And I've said some of the girls, the jobs they are training, the skills they are learning in Ghana here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayisha. We've got a question here from Felicity, who says, is it better to donate to charities or to directly to homeless individuals? This is a question that's for everyone.
For charity.
Anyone else who wants to add to that? I see Jax coming in.
Yeah, I always give directly to people because I think that is the most dignified thing to do, and it allows them agency to, you know, make the choice of what they're going to do with the money or the thing that you're giving them. And I think, you know, empowering them and giving that dignity back for people in very undignified situations is really empowering and really important. And just taking little individual actions like that can make such a difference to somebody's day and life, instead of them having to go and approach a charity or wait for somebody to approach them to help them. You know, you're giving them their choice back. And that's often a more immediate response than you'll be able to get through NGOs or governments and stuff, which are, you know, very clunky and bureaucratic and take a lot of time and money to get anything done. So I think, you know, if you see something and can do something and it's safe for you to do something, then do the thing and help the person.
Thanks, Jax. And I think the key word being there was dignity. That's really important, that we must remember to treat people with dignity at every chance we get. And it goes back to, I think it was Nadia's question, who said, what can an average person be doing? They can be doing exactly what Jax mentioned, as a small act of their own. Just trying to look through and see if we've got, I think we have one more question and then I'll wrap us up. There's a question for Orpah here, and the question is, you mentioned having people with lived experience feeding into your framework. What is missing in the toolkit that has been added as a result of lived experience? What is missed from policy responses without the input?
Thanks, Kaira. I typed a bit of a 3-paragraph answer by accident in the chat here, and maybe some of my other panelists can chime in for the second part of that question as well, about what's missed from policy responses without the input of people with lived experience. Jax, being in the role that you're in, I'm sure you have a lot of feedback about that. But for us, with the relaunch of the toolkit, we started that process with an advisory committee that involved people with lived experience. And so they really guided that work and held consultations with young people currently experiencing homelessness about what more was needed. And through those, all of those discussions and meetings, we came up with a few modules that hadn't been as fleshed out or as included in the toolkit previously. Specifically, the one I mentioned in the chat was around serving young people with specific intersectional identities, 2S LGBTQIA+ identities. And so that was a huge, within that, we talk about, you know, young people who have disabilities, young people who are racialized and also identify as 2S LGBTQIA+. And so that was a huge piece of work that was touched upon perhaps in the first iteration of the toolkit, but was built on so much more because of the input that we had from that advisory committee and from the lived experience, the people with lived experience who were on that advisory committee. And yeah, I think I wrote here that someone in the chat, or Show Is Ogai, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but mentioned nothing about us without us. And I've heard it phrased as nothing for us without us as well. And I think that's a really good way of just looking at policy responses. I put here that policies without input from people who will be impacted and perhaps most impacted by those policies won't work to improve outcomes for everyone. They'll just maybe improve outcomes for some people. And it brings back the title of this panel, you know, leaving no one behind. That input is needed for policies like Gregory and several people on this panel have mentioned to make sure that everyone is being served by those policies, not just a few people. Does anybody have anything else to add to that piece?
I think you summed it up perfectly, Orpah. But I think at this point, it's just hit 6:30 here for me. So I'm going to hand over back to IGH's Executive Director, Lydia, to just give us the closing remarks. But just on my end, I want to say thank you very much to IGH, to UN Habitat for having me as moderator. Massive thank you to the panelists. Without you, this conversation couldn't have taken place, and it was a very important conversation to be had. So thank you, and over to Lydia.
Thanks, Kaira, for all your work in putting this together and for facilitating it. And I want to say particular thanks to Lucas from UN Habitat, along with his colleagues Francesca, Naomi, and Christina for helping us to organize and to host this on the WebEx platform. And I really cannot say enough thanks to Ayisha, Jax, Orpah, and Gregory for being a part of this conversation, and to all of you in the audience who followed along and were chatting along and putting in the Q&A. I think, you know, I jotted down several key takeaways from this conversation, really around centering and giving power to people who have experienced homelessness. That's really what it's all about. So there is more that IGH can do in that regard, and more that we can do to encourage all of our partners around the world to do it. So again, thank you for this conversation, and you know, I'm sure it's the first of many. So thank you very much to you all for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever in the world you are. Thank you. All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And just here,
Thank you.